The grand chambers of the Galactic Council reverberated with a cacophony of raised voices and heated debates. Representatives from a myriad of starfaring species, each more bizarre than the last, filled the tiered seats. At the center of the storm stood Marcus Sinclair, the human ambassador, his tall frame rigid with barely contained emotion. "Esteemed counselors," Sinclair began, his voice projected by the chamber's acoustics, "I come before you today with a heavy heart and a righteous fury. The Krill, in an act of unprovoked aggression, have laid waste to our colony of New Eden. Tens of thousands of innocent civilians lie dead, their homes and dreams reduced to ashes." Murmurs of shock and outrage rippled through the assembled delegates. Sinclair paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I have seen the devastation firsthand," he continued, his voice cracking. "I've walked among the ruins, held the broken bodies of children in my arms. This was not a military target, but a peaceful settlement of families seeking a new life among the stars." As Sinclair spoke, holoprojectors flared to life, casting harrowing images above the council floor. Scenes of fiery destruction and heart-wrenching loss played out, etching the horror of the attack into the minds of all present. "This barbaric assault cannot go unanswered," Sinclair declared, his eyes blazing with conviction. "The human delegation demands that the council sanction an immediate retaliatory strike against the Krill to ensure such an atrocity never happens again." Across the chamber, the insectoid form of Zixtor, the Krill representative, rose to his feet. His chitinous exoskeleton glinted under the chamber lights as he clacked his mandibles in a gesture of dismissal. "The humans have only themselves to blame," Zixtor buzzed, waving a clawed appendage. "They were expanding too close to our sovereign territory. They were warned repeatedly to respect our borders. We simply taught them a necessary lesson." The chamber erupted into a maelstrom of shouting and recriminations. The Krill had long been known as a belligerent and expansionist power, but this attack had struck a new chord of outrage. "Warnings?" Sinclair shouted back, his voice rising above the din. "Your warnings were nothing more than vague threats and posturing. New Eden was well within recognized human space. Your claims of encroachment are baseless and you know it." "The humans are a reckless, volatile species," Zixtor retorted, his multifaceted eyes glittering with disdain. "You spread like a plague, intruding where you are not welcome. Consider this a firm reminder to know your place." As the council descended into bickering and finger-pointing, Marcus Sinclair stood resolute, his gaze fixed on the Krill delegate. Many of the gathered species had long viewed humanity as an upstart power, a promising but unpredictable addition to the galactic stage. In their eyes, this tragedy was a regrettable but inevitable consequence of human overreach. Sinclair could see the political winds shifting against him. The council, ever cautious and fractious, would be slow to act against one of its own, even in the face of such wanton aggression. He felt a bitter rage welling up inside him, a righteous fury at this betrayal of justice. "If this council will not act to protect the innocent and punish the guilty," Sinclair declared, his voice cold as the void, "then humanity will be forced to take matters into its own hands. We will not let the blood of our people go unavenged." With that and don't quiet, the human delegation stalked from the chamber, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The gathered aliens shifted uncomfortably, the implications of Sinclair's parting words all too clear. A reckoning was coming, and the galaxy would tremble before the wrath of humankind. In the weeks following the Council's inaction, whispers began to echo through the galaxy's shadowy corners. Stories of human ships striking like ghosts against Krill border outposts, leaving only destruction in their wake. The few survivors babbled incoherently of lightning-fast assaults and weapons that sliced through shields like paper. In an emergency council session, Zixtor slammed his claws against the podium, his carapace quivering with rage. "These cowardly raids bear the mark of human treachery," he screeched, his voice rising to a shrill pitch. "But the primitive apes could not have achieved such a technological leap alone. One of you must be secretly arming them in violation of council law. The chamber erupted in a chorus of denials and counter-accusations. The Zorathians claimed the humans must have reverse-engineered Krill tech from the New Eden attack. The Vothrians suggested the Krill were fabricating the incidents to justify further aggression. Through it all, Marcus Sinclair remained conspicuously silent. When pressed by reporters, his only response was a tight-lipped smile and a cryptic remark. Humanity's course is its own to chart. The galaxy will see our resolve soon enough. Sinclair's stony demeanor only fueled the rampant speculation. Some whispered that the taciturn soldier had gone rogue, consumed by grief and a thirst for vengeance. Others murmured that the whole war had been a ploy to fast-track humanity's ascent on the galactic stage. Only a select few knew the truth, that the old warrior was the tip of a spear, one forged in humanity's darkest hour. Deep in the uncharted fringes of human space, a hidden installation thrummed with feverish activity. In a stark white laboratory, Dr. Ella Ivanov stood before a wall of monitors, each showing real-time biometric data from the Project Jericho volunteers. Her brow furrowed as she watched the neural synchronization rates climb into the red. "Talk to me, Omega-3, she called out, her eyes never leaving the flickering displays. "How's the new exoskeleton handling?" On the screen, a hulking figure in sleek black armor pivoted and leapt with superhuman agility, ripping through a phalanx of simulated krill with devastating precision. The volunteer's voice crackled over the comms, edged with a manic glee. "It's incredible, Doc. I feel like I could tear a tank in half with my bare hands." Dr. Ivanov chewed her lip, a mix of exhilaration and dread churning in her gut. The wetware enhancements, the fruit of years of clandestine research, were exceeding even her wildest projections. But the way the operator's vital signs spiked and shuddered, it hinted at a terrible strain beneath the surface. The hiss of the lab door jolted her from her thoughts. General Graves strode in, his craggy face set in a grim mask. "Status report, Doctor. The brass are getting impatient." Ivanov met his steely gaze, her voice steady despite the tension coiled in her chest. "The neural link is stable, and the hyper-adaptive combat AI is integrating seamlessly. We've achieved a perfect fusion of human intuition and machine precision. But, Graves pressed, his eyes narrowing. "The psychological strain on the operators is immense." Ivanov continued, her words coming in a rush. "We're tapping into the deepest, most primal parts of the human psyche. Aggression, survival instinct, the will to dominate. It's like we're mainlining pure adrenaline into their minds. I fear—" Graves cut her off with a sharp gesture, his gaze fixing on the monitors where the Jericho operatives danced their deadly ballet. "Your concerns are noted, Doctor, but we're out of time and options. The Krill want humanity on its knees, and the Council is all too happy to let it happen." He turned back to Ivanov, his weathered face cast in the eerie glow of the screens. "You've given us the key to survival. We didn't start this fight, but by God, we'll finish it. The Krill wanted a monster. Now they'll reap the whirlwind." As if on cue, the comm crackled to life, Omega-3's voice thick with savage exultation. "Ha! Did you see that? I just ripped that bug's spine out through his thorax. These Krill are toast, General. Just give the word and we'll blast them back to the Stone Age." Graves and Ivanov shared a long, meaningful look. They had unleashed something truly terrifying, a melding of man and machine fueled by humanity's most primal fury. The galaxy would soon tremble before the coming storm. And in that moment, Dr. Ivanov couldn't help but wonder if in their desperate bid for survival, they hadn't become the very monsters they sought to destroy. The Krill Armada stretched as far as the eye could see, a glittering swarm of ships poised above the mottled green orb of their homeworld. On the bridge of the flagship, Zixtor stood tall, his carapace polished to a resplendent sheen. The anticipation of long-awaited victory thrummed through his very exoskeleton. "Look upon the might of the Krill," he gloated, gesturing to the assembled fleet with a sweep of his claw. "Soon the upstart humans will learn the folly of their defiance. We shall scour their worlds clean and mount their skulls as trophies." His bridge crew chittered in bloodthirsty agreement, mandibles clacking with glee. They had long chafed at the humans' insolence, their refusal to bow to Krill's superiority. Now they would savor the apes' extermination. Suddenly, a piercing alarm shattered the triumphant mood. Zixtor whirled to face the sensor operator, eyes narrowed. "Report!" The operator's antennae quivered as it studied the readouts. "Warlord, new contacts at the system's edge. They appear to be human ships." Zixtor's mandibles twitched in surprise. Had the Council reconsidered and sent reinforcements to aid their doomed pets? He magnified the display and burst into clicking laughter. A mere handful of human vessels, barely 100 strong, were charging headlong towards the massed krill armada. They were dwarfed by the sheer size of the insectoid fleet, like minnows challenging a shark. "The primates have gone mad," Zixtor crowed, waving his claws in mocking pity. They rushed to embrace their own extinction. But as the human ships closed range, they began to disgorge fighters. Zixtor leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes widening. These were no ordinary strike craft. They were sleek and organic in design, moving with an unsettling fluidity as they wove through the void. "Magnify!" he snapped, a flicker of unease stirring in his thorax. The display zoomed in on one of the strange craft, revealing a lone human at its heart. But this was no ordinary pilot. They were encased in some kind of exoskeletal armor, their face obscured behind an inscrutable black visor. Zixtor's unease blossomed into outright alarm. "All ships, engage! Swat these gnats from the sky!" The krill fleet opened fire, unleashing a blistering hail of plasma and missiles. The space between the two forces became a maelstrom of crisscrossing energy beams and explosions. Any conventional foe would have been instantly annihilated, but the human fighters slipped through the onslaught like wraiths. Their movements so swift and erratic they seemed to defy physics. They pirouetted through the chaos with preternatural grace, evading certain death by margins so narrow they defied belief. And then they struck back. Lances of searing light erupted from the fighters, punching through krill shields as if they were gossamer. The beams carved into ship after ship with surgical precision, precisely targeting vital systems and crew. In a matter of moments, a dozen krill vessels were left drifting and lifeless. Zixtor gaped in disbelief, his mandibles slack with shock. These pilots, they moved and fought with a savagery and skill that was simply inhuman. It was as if they were extensions of their ships, bonded in some perverse symbiosis of flesh and machine. All around him, the mighty krill fleet was coming apart at the seams. Captains wailed in terror as the black-visored demons tore through their defenses like razors through silk. The void was littered with the shattered husks of once proud warships. "Impossible," Zixtor whispered, his legs trembling beneath him. "They're just primitives, barbarians. How can they—" His words died in his throat as the last of his escorts exploded into a fireball. The human fighters, their grim work done, wheeled away and streaked back towards their carriers, leaving Zixtor alone, his ship defenseless before the human fleet. "Warlord Zixtor!" The voice that crackled over the comm was cold and hard as steel. The screen flickered to life, revealing a grizzled human face marred by scars. "I am General Graves of the Terran Defense Force. You wanted to see our teeth? Witness humanity's bite." Zixtor could only watch in numb horror as the human dreadnoughts oriented their guns. The last thing he saw was a blinding lance of light, and then oblivion. On the bridge of the TDF flagship, Dr. Ivanov stared at the expanding cloud of debris that had once been the krill homeworld. Tears streaked her ashen face as she thought of the Jericho operatives, those broken minds that had been forced to burn their very essence for this Pyrrhic victory. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice cracking, "what have we become?" Beside her, General Graves bowed his head, the weight of their choices etched into every line of his face. "What we had to," he murmured. "What we had to." As the embers of a shattered world drifted across the stars, the price of humanity's survival had never felt so high, or so terribly, damningly final. The news of the krill's eradication spread through the galaxy like wildfire. In the halls of the Galactic Council, the once dismissive representatives now huddled in fearful clusters, their hushed whispers echoing with a single chilling question: who will be next? An emergency session was hastily convened. the chamber's air thick with tension and dread. All eyes turned to the human delegation's booth, expecting to see the grim visage of Ambassador Sinclair. But the seat remained empty, a mute testament to humanity's absence. "Where are they?" The Zorathian counselor's voice quavered as he voiced the question on everyone's mind. "Why have the humans not come to gloat over their victory?" "Perhaps they fear the council's judgment," the Vothrian representative offered, though her words rang hollow. Their actions against the Krill, while provoked, were excessive, genocidal even. As the hours ticked by with no sign of the human delegation, confusion gave way to a gnawing unease. Calls were made, transmissions sent, but only silence answered. It was as if Earth and its colonies had simply vanished, swallowed by the void. Days turned to weeks, then months. The galaxy held its collective breath, waiting for the hammer blow of human retribution to fall. But nothing came. Finally, a brave few set out to pierce the veil of mystery. Emissaries from a dozen species converged on the human core worlds, steeling themselves for the worst. What they found defied belief. Towering cities stood empty, their streets devoid of life. Homes, factories, schools, all abandoned, as if their occupants had simply stepped out one day and never returned. No signs of struggle, no clues to the fate of the billions who once called these worlds home. The galaxy erupted into a frenzy of speculation. Some claimed the humans had transcended physical form, ascending to a higher plane of existence. Others whispered of a mass exodus, a self-imposed exile to the uncharted depths of space. But in the shadows, darker theories took root, that humanity had never truly left, but instead now lurked unseen, watching from the darkness, that they had become something other, something that defied understanding. Only a select few knew the truth. In a hidden bunker, buried deep beneath the scarred surface of a long-forgotten world, the last of the Jericho scientists gathered. Their faces were haggard, eyes haunted by the weight of their sins. Dr. Ivanov, her once vibrant hair now streaked with gray, stared at the flickering screens before her. The final recordings of the Jericho operatives played out in silent agony, a testament to the horror they had unleashed. "We went too far," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The wetware enhancements, the neural conditioning, it was too much. Their minds couldn't handle it." Beside her, General Graves sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. "We created monsters," he rasped, "transhuman demons with the power to snuff out worlds. And we thought we could control them. On the screens, the Jericho soldiers writhed in their exoskeletons, their faces contorted in silent screams. Psionic energy crackled around them, warping the very fabric of reality. "In the end, it was them or us," Dr. Ivanov murmured. "Madness or extinction. What choice did we have?" The bunker fell silent, the weight of their final gamble hanging heavy in the air. Humanity had vanished, true, but not into the void. They had turned inward, retreating into the labyrinth of their own enhanced minds. A species transformed, transcended, but at what cost? As the last of the Jericho scientists bowed their heads, they could only pray that the rest of the galaxy would never learn the terrifying truth. For in the silence of the stars, the transhuman heirs of Earth now dreamed, and in their dreams, the fate of all hung in the balance. In the vast emptiness of space, far from the prying eyes of the galaxy, a fleet of massive ships drifted silently through the void. These were the Generation Arcs, the last hope of a species that had looked into the abyss of its own potential and recoiled in horror. Each arc was a world unto itself, a self-contained ecosystem housing a precious cargo of human lives. Gone were the devastating weapons and reality-warping technologies that had nearly doomed their race. In their place were simple tools, the building blocks of a new civilization forged in humility and hope. On the observation deck of the Pilgrim's Hope, a group of children gathered around an elderly woman, their eyes wide with wonder. They were the descendants of the Jericho survivors, the inheritors of a legacy both terrifying and awe-inspiring. "Grandmother Ivanov, tell us the story again," a young girl pleaded, her voice filled with excitement. "The one about the demons and the heroes." The old woman smiled, her eyes crinkling with a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. Very well, children. Gather round. She activated a hollow projector, its soft blue glow casting ghostly shadows across the room. Images flickered to life, scenes of a past that seemed almost mythical in its strangeness. Long ago, in the time before the Great Awakening, our ancestors faced a terrible foe. Ivanov began, her voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. The Krill, a ruthless race of insectoid warriors, sought to exterminate humanity and claim the galaxy for their own. The children gasped as the projector displayed the Krill armada in all its horrifying glory, a swarm of chitinous ships blotting out the stars. But humanity would not go quietly into the night. Ivanov continued. In their darkest hour, they created the Jericho soldiers, warriors enhanced with technology that granted them godlike powers. The images shifted, revealing the black-visored Jericho operatives in their sleek exoskeletons, tearing through Krill ships with preternatural speed and savagery. The Jericho soldiers turned the tide, decimating the Krill and saving our species from extinction. But their victory came at a terrible cost. The holoprojector flickered, the once triumphant scenes replaced by images of madness and despair. Jericho operatives writhed in their armor, psionic energy crackling around them as their enhanced minds unraveled. The power they wielded was too much for any human to bear, Ivanov explained, her voice heavy with grief. It unleashed the darkest aspects of our nature, turning our greatest heroes into the demons we feared. A hush fell over the room, the children's eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. The young girl who had spoken earlier clutched her doll tightly, her voice trembling. "The old ones were so scary," she exclaimed. "I'm glad we're not like that anymore." Ivanov reached out and gently ruffled the girl's hair, a sad smile playing across her weathered features. "Yes, little one, we were scary, but we were also so much more." She rose to her feet, gesturing to the observation window. Beyond the glass, the stars seemed to stretch out forever, a glittering promise of new beginnings. In the end, when faced with the choice between madness and extinction, our ancestors made the hardest decision of all. They chose to leave their demons behind, to start anew as a humbler, wiser species. Ivanov's eyes sparkled with unshed tears as she gazed out at the infinite expanse. They gave up their power, their homeworlds, everything they had ever known, all so that you, the generations to come, could have a chance at a brighter future. The children looked up at her, their faces filled with a newfound understanding. The weight of their ancestors' sacrifice, the enormity of the second chance they had been granted, began to sink in. "Never forget, my dears," Ivanov whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Our ancestors were heroes not because of the demons they unleashed, but because they found the strength to turn back from the brink. They reclaimed our humanity, and in so doing, gave us the greatest gift of all." As the Orcs journeyed on through the endless night, carrying the seeds of a new human civilization to distant stars, Ivanov offered a silent prayer of thanks. For in the end, when it mattered most, her people had found the courage to change their path. And in that courage, she knew, lay the true measure of their worth, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as a species that had looked into the face of its own darkness and chosen, against all odds, to embrace the light.